Hello Bookfighters, this video comes to you today in 3 parts. Part 1, YouTube, be nice to Julia. Part 2, Katie, I really like the new Squidoo, especially that we're all in costume, though I do resent the accusation made against me, sarcastic though it may be, in your description of Dan. I am not that polite, or proper, or couth. Part 3, and this one's the most shocking. Daniel, I spent almost the entirety of your video doing, well, this. Before I actually get into that, I know we have a lot of new viewers, so just to give you some context, there are, I would estimate, probably about 5 things that Dan and I disagree on. They manifest themselves into basically everything, so this happens a lot. However, I think probably the thing that I disagreed with most was this.
As far as this point goes, surely it is the author's job to impart knowledge onto the reader. And surely that is the main and possibly only job of the author.
To say that the primary job of an author is to impart knowledge assumes that the primary purpose of all reading is to learn fact, which really it isn't. There are a lot of reasons why people read, sometimes for entertainment, sometimes it is to learn, but sometimes it's to learn, yes, about the actual facts of a situation, but sometimes it's more to learn about people, how other people think, how other people view the world, how different things in the world work. Sometimes it's just to enjoy a good story. So the job of an author really varies depending on the purpose of the book. Moby Dick is a novel, so most people are going to be going into it with the expectations that come with reading a novel. It's not a reference book, it's not a book that people are going to be going to primarily to learn facts about whaling and ships. We really don't need to be told this much information about whaling and ships for the story to work, even if you don't know anything at all about any of that stuff. For instance, I first became interested in whales, the Red Dragon kind, not the Moby Dick kind, when I read Swiftly Tilting Planet, but I didn't need to be told every single detail about whales for the story to work. That's why I just got this book in the mail, and I don't know where I'm gonna put it, because the non-fiction and comic book shelf is full. The actual plot of the story isn't actually the most important aspect of Moby Dick, but there's more to a story than just the plot. Like Katie, I kind of really want to compare this to The Fault in Our Stars, but I can't. So, Paper Towns instead, since I think most of us should be familiar with that book. Paper Towns is a book that, to me, isn't really so much about the plot, although the plot in Paper Towns is very interesting, and in some ways is kind of similar to Moby Dick. Like Ishmael, Q finds himself involved in a quest set up by another that becomes, he thinks, a matter of life and death. Though, in Ishmael's case, really was. There's a dramatic chase towards the end, and the novel is told by a narrator observing another character who becomes, almost in many ways, more important than the narrator himself. Everything in Paper Towns centers on Margot the way everything in Moby Dick is centered on Ahab. They're also both books that are very full of symbolism and based on things that people aren't necessarily going to know a whole lot about. In the case of Moby Dick, it's whaling. In the case of Paper Towns, cartography. But they handle those two things in vastly different ways, and to my mind, Paper Towns does it so much better. Because in Paper Towns, while you need to know some information about cartography, you don't need to know every single detail about cartography, and that's kind of how in Moby Dick, you really don't need every detail about whaling, and while that may be interesting and it's always great to learn more, I definitely agree that there's no such thing as too much knowledge. I also feel that there can be too much knowledge presented in a certain context if that knowledge is then getting in the way of the rest of the book. If it's getting in the way of the story, then it's kind of causing a problem. It's kind of like when movies have big, amazing special effects that look really beautiful, but they get way in the way of the story, and then I hate them. And we've never discussed that one before. I wouldn't say that Ishmael is Herman Melville, because, yeah, as you said, Ishmael is a character in the book. But he's a character created and written by Herman Melville, so in a way, because Herman Melville, as the author, has control over everything that happens and everything that Ishmael decides to say, because Ishmael doesn't actually have his own independent agency, I would argue that everything in the book is a part of Melville's voice. Anything Melville chooses to say is something he chooses to say. And so in reading the book, reading that, yes, it is Ishmael who's saying that, and it is Ishmael, the later Ishmael, who's telling the story, not the one who's experiencing the story. But it's still Herman Melville choosing to do that, so it still felt incredibly irritating and overbearing. Overall, I think I probably could have dealt with Ishmael if, well, two things. One, if there were actually anything in the book that gave me a reason to care about anything in the book. And two, if everything else that's not just an observation of Ishmael's weren't so incredibly implausibly convenient. Like Spouter and Coffin and Elijah. Really? Really? Elijah and Ahab? You had to go there? Really? Look at the time period context. Really? Really, in the end, most of my complaints about Moby Dick aren't that it's bad, it's just it could be so much better to the point where it becomes irritating that it isn't. And also, all the things that are things I don't like are the things that irritate me most about novels when authors do them. Dan, I'll see you on Monday.